The outcast goth werewolf girl who saved me from her own pack. How many ways can a man die on a planet that considers him an appetizer? Quentin wiped condensation from his goggles and adjusted the strap of his specimen bag. The mist on the ridges of Lycanthropia felt like wet wool against his face. He had come here to study the bioluminescent moss that only grew on the jagged peaks of the High Needle, but the weather had turned faster than a cornered predator. His yellow rain slicker crunched as he stepped over a fallen log. The plastic material was loud in the silence of the woods. It was a beacon for anything with ears. He checked the pulse scanner on his wrist. The screen flickered with 3 red dots. They were moving in a flanking maneuver. Quentin did not panic. He reached into his pocket and gripped the handle of a high-frequency deterrent. It was a non-lethal tool, meant to irritate the sensitive ears of the local fauna, but he knew the pack on this ridge was different. They were not just animals. They were the reason the human colonies stayed behind reinforced steel fences. The first growl came from behind a curtain of weeping pine branches. It was deep and resonant, a sound that felt like it was vibrating in Quentin's marrow. He stopped and stood his ground. He did not run. Running invited the chase. A massive figure stepped into the gray light. Barrett was nearly 7 feet tall, his gray fur matted with rain and his chest bare despite the freezing mountain air. He wore heavy leather trousers held up by a belt made of braided hide. His eyes were a flat, predatory blue. "You are a long way from the research station, little monkey," Barrett said. His voice was a gravelly rasp that barely sounded human. "I am exactly where I intended to be," Quentin replied. He kept his voice steady. "I have a permit for this sector." Barrett laughed, a wet and jagged sound. "We do not eat permits. They are very dry. My brothers are hungry and you look like you have been eating well." 2 more wolves emerged from the mist. They were smaller than Barrett but just as lean and dangerous. They began to circle, their claws clicking against the damp rocks. Quentin watched them, calculating the distance. He could hit one with the deterrent, but the other 2 would be on him before he could reset the device. He needed a miracle or a mistake. The air suddenly changed. A sharp whistle cut through the tension, high and demanding. From a ledge above them, a figure dropped down with the grace of a falling shadow. She landed between Quentin and the pack, her boots hitting the mud with a heavy thud. She was smaller than the others, her fur a striking, moon-washed silver that looked almost white against the dark forest. She was not dressed like the rest of her pack. She wore a scuffed leather biker jacket covered in metal studs and patches of forgotten human bands. Around her neck was a thick velvet choker with a silver ring at the center. She wore fingerless studded gloves, and her amber eyes glowed with a fierce, defiant intelligence. "That is enough, Barrett," she said. Her voice was smooth but carried a sharp edge of authority. Barrett bared his teeth, his upper lip curling to reveal yellowed fangs. "Ramona, this is pack business. The human is on our land, he is meat." Ramona stepped closer to Quentin, her shoulder brushing against his rain slicker. She did not look back at him, but he could feel the heat radiating from her. "This human is my property now," she said. "I claimed him the moment he crossed the ridge, so back off before I make you." The larger wolf let out a mocking snort. "You and what army, Goth? You spend your days reading moldy books and wearing human trash. You think you can stop 3 of us?" Ramona did not flinch. She reached into a pocket of her jacket and pulled out a heavy, jagged piece of obsidian shaped into a blade. She held it with the ease of someone who knew exactly where to strike. "I do not need an army to gut a coward who hunts hikers. If you want him, come through me. But remember that the Alpha hates it when we waste healthy warriors on petty squabbles. If I mark you, you will be the one the pack eats next winter." The 2 smaller wolves hesitated. They looked at Barrett, waiting for a signal. The tension was a physical weight in the air. Quentin held his breath, his hand still tight on the deterrent. He looked at the back of Ramona's head, nodding the way her silver fur was trimmed in a sharp, stylish undercut. She was an anomaly in a world of primal brutality. Barrett spat on the ground near Ramona's boots. "Keep your pet, freak. He is probably as stringy as those books you love so much. We will find better sport in the valley." He turned and vanished into the mist, the other two following close behind. The sound of their movement faded until only the dripping of the trees remained. Ramona waited a full minute before she sheathed her blade. She turned around and looked Quentin up and down. Her amber eyes were intense, searching for any sign of weakness. "You are either very brave or very stupid," she said. "I prefer the term dedicated," Quentin replied. He let out a long breath and forced his hands to stop trembling. "Thank you. I do not think my permit would have saved me there." She huffed a sound that was half laugh and half snarl. "Permits mean nothing here. Barrett is a bully, but he is right about one thing. You are a long way from home. Why are you out here alone?" "I am a biologist," Quentin said. "I was looking for the glowing moss. It only reacts to the atmosphere at this altitude." Ramona looked at his specimen bag and then back at his face. "Moss. You almost died for some glowing weeds. Humans are even more strange than the stories say." "I believe in documenting the beauty of this world," Quentin said, "even the parts that want to kill me." Ramona's expression softened for a fraction of a second. She reached out and touched the yellow fabric of his slicker with a gloved hand. "You are going to be documented as a snack if you stay out here. The mist is getting thicker. My cave is nearby. It is safe, or at least safer than standing in the middle of a trail like a neon sign." Quentin looked back toward the path he had come from. The way was lost in a wall of gray. He looked at Ramona, the silver-furred outcast in a leather jacket who had just risked her life for a stranger. "Lead the way," he said. "Keep moving if you want to live through the night," she told him, turning toward a narrow crevice in the rocks. "And try not to trip. I would hate to have to carry you." Quentin followed her, his boots crunching on the damp pine needles. As they climbed higher, he realized that her golden eyes held more depth than any human he had ever met. She was a bridge between two worlds, and for the first time since he had landed on Lycanthropia, he felt like he might actually belong here. He watched the way she moved, a perfect blend of predatory grace and calculated poise. She was not just a protector. She was a mystery he was suddenly very eager to solve. The ridge loomed above them, a jagged tooth against the darkening sky. The wind began to howl, but with Ramona leading the way, the sound no longer felt like a threat. It felt like an invitation. He adjusted his pack and stepped into the shadows of the cave, leaving the cold world behind for the warmth of the unknown. The cave was not the damp, skeletal den Quentin had expected. It was a sanctuary of organized chaos. As he stepped past the threshold, the cold bite of the lycanthropian wind died away, replaced by the smell of old paper, dry earth, and a faint, metallic scent he recognized as cooling electronics. A small, solar-powered lantern sat on a flat crate, casting a steady amber glow that matched Ramona's eyes. Ramona moved to the center of the space and tossed her studded gloves onto a workbench made from a salvaged cargo door. She didn't look back at him immediately. Instead, she reached for a heavy leather jacket she had draped over a stone projection. "You should be more careful where you wander, hiker," she said. Her voice had lost the jagged edge she used on the pack, replaced by a weary, melodic resonance. She began to inspect a jagged tear near the collar of her jacket, her brow furrowing in frustration. Quentin unslung his heavy pack, the weight leaving his shoulders with a grateful ache. "I'm not just a hiker," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still humming through his veins. "I am a biologist. I was sent to the ridges of Lycanthropia to catalog the rare mosses that grow in the high altitudes. They have unique chemical properties that could stabilize cellular degradation. I appreciate the rescue, Ramona. I truly do." She turned her head, catching his gaze. "A biologist. So you come to our world to pick at the weeds and name the dirt. Most humans stay in the domed colonies down in the valley. They are afraid of the dark and the things that breathe in it." "I am not afraid of the dark," Quentin replied. "I am afraid of ignorance, and I am grateful that you are not like the others out there." Ramona laughed, a short, sharp sound that was more human than wolf. "The others. You mean Barrett and his pack of scavengers. They think strength is measured by the size of a kill. They do not understand why I keep these things. She gestured to the walls of the cave, which were lined with makeshift shelves holding dozens of physical books and a few flickering data pads. They call me a freak because I would rather read about the stars than hunt a mountain goat, she continued, her fingers tracing the torn seam of her jacket. I have always felt like a stranger in my own skin. My pack sees a failure. I see a world that is much bigger than this ridge. Quentin walked closer, his boots silent on the packed dirt floor. He reached into the side pocket of his pack and pulled out a compact, silver-cased field repair kit. It was a standard-issue tool for interstellar researchers, containing high-tensile polymer threads and a micro-welder for synthetic fabrics. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the jacket. Ramona hesitated. Her ears flicked back, a vestigial sign of her heritage, but then she softened. She handed him the heavy garment. It was thick, weathered, and smelled of wood smoke. Quentin sat on a nearby crate and opened the kit. He worked with the practiced precision of a man who spent his days handling delicate biological samples. He didn't rush. He chose a thread that matched the dark hide and began to stitch the tear with a reinforced cross pattern. "You have steady hands for someone who was almost a snack 5 minutes ago," Ramona observed. She sat on the floor across from him, her silver fur catching the lantern light. "I find that focusing on a task keeps the mind from wandering into dark places," Quentin said. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You saved my life. Fixing a jacket is the least I can do, but I am curious. Why did you claim me? You told them I was your property." She looked away, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling. "Property is a word they understand. If I told them you were a guest, they would have challenged me for the right to eat you. If I claim you as a possession, it is a matter of territory. Barrett is ambitious, but he is not yet ready to challenge me for a direct claim. He thinks I am beneath him, but he knows I am faster." Quentin pulled the thread taut, closing the gap in the leather. "You are more than fast, Ramona. You are intelligent. That is why they are actually afraid of you." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a moment the gap between their species seemed to vanish entirely. "You see a lot for a human," she whispered. "I see a person who is tired of being alone," he said gently. He tied off the knot and used the micro-welder to fuse the ends of the polymer. He handed the jacket back to her. It was as strong as the day it was made, the repair nearly invisible. Ramona ran her thumb over the smooth stitches. "No one has ever done something like this for me. In the pack, if something is broken, you throw it away or you fight to keep it. This is different. This is kindness." "It is how things should be," Quentin said. He leaned back, his back resting against a stack of crates labeled with the insignia of a long-defunct mining corporation. The mist outside the cave entrance was thick and white, obscuring the jagged peaks of the mountain. Earlier, that mist had felt like a suffocating shroud, a place where monsters waited to end his life. Now, with the warmth of the lantern and the presence of the woman across from him, it felt like a curtain drawn against a world that didn't understand them. "I have spent my life looking through microscopes, trying to find the building blocks of survival," Quentin said. "But I think I learned more about survival in the last 20 minutes than I did in 10 years of university." Ramona put the jacket back on, zipping it up with a sharp metallic click. She looked empowered, the repair giving her a renewed sense of dignity. "You are a strange man, Quentin the biologist. You are in the middle of a predator territory, surrounded by a pack that wants your head, and you are sitting here talking about philosophy." "I am in the company of a friend," he corrected her. "That changes the mathematics of the situation." Ramona leaned her head back against the stone, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Friend. I like the sound of that. It is a much better word than property." The tension that had gripped Quentin's chest since he landed on Lycanthropia finally began to ease. He realized that his arrival on this planet had been more than a research mission. It was a collision of two souls who had both been searching for a reason to stop running. The ridge was still dangerous, and Barrett was still out there, but as the night deepened, the cave felt like the safest place in the galaxy. They sat in the quiet glow, the silence filled not with fear, but with the budding warmth of a connection that neither had expected to find among the jagged rocks of a lonely world. The fire in the center of the cave crackled as the dry wood Quentin had gathered earlier finally caught. The orange light danced across the stone walls, reflecting off the spines of old books and the glass lenses of salvaged equipment. Ramona sat on a crate, her silver fur catching the light like polished metal. She was still examining the stitches Quentin had placed in her leather jacket, her expression unreadable. Quentin checked the settings on his portable environmental scanner, the screen glowing a soft blue in the dimness. He felt a strange peace despite the circumstances. This was a biological survey that had turned into a survival mission, yet the presence of the woman across from him made the danger feel manageable. A sudden scrape of stone against stone echoed from the entrance of the cave. Ramona was on her feet in an instant, her posture low and her claws extending from her gloved fingertips. Quentin reached for his heavy flashlight, not as a source of light, but as a potential weight to swing if things went wrong. He didn't panic. He watched the shadows, waiting for a sign of movement. "Stay behind me," Ramona whispered, her voice a low vibration that seemed to come from deep within her chest. A figure emerged from the darkness of the tunnel. It was another werewolf, but she lacked Ramona's rebellious attire. She wore a simple tunic of cured leather and moved with a grace that suggested high status within the pack. Her fur was a deep charcoal gray, and her eyes were a piercing, cold blue. She stopped at the edge of the light, her hands raised to show she wasn't carrying a weapon. "Nadine," Ramona said, though she didn't relax her stance. "Why are you here? You should be at the feast with the others." "The feast has turned into a council of war," Nadine replied, her gaze shifting briefly to Quentin. "You have caused a significant problem, Ramona. Bringing a human into the heart of the ridge is one thing. Claiming him as property in front of the young hunters is another. Barrett is using it to fuel a fire that has been smoldering for seasons." Quentin stepped forward, standing beside Ramona rather than behind her. He noticed the way Nadine's eyes narrowed as he moved. He didn't look like a captive, and he certainly didn't act like one. "What is Barrett telling them?" he asked. Nadine stepped closer, the firelight revealing a long scar across her shoulder. "He is telling the Alpha that you are not just a hiker or a researcher. He claims you are a scout for the human colonies in the valley. He says Ramona has betrayed the blood of the pack by sheltering a spy. He is calling for a ritual hunt to cleanse the ridge." Ramona's breath hitched. "A ritual hunt is a death sentence," she said. "The Alpha would never agree to that without proof." "He does not need proof when Barrett offers him a way to maintain control," Nadine said. "Barrett is cleverer than you give him credit for, Ramona. He plans to lead the hunt himself. If he brings the human's head to the Alpha, he will have the momentum he needs to challenge for the leadership. He is using this human as a trophy to stage a coup. He wants to lead the pack down into the valley to raid the settlements." Quentin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. This wasn't just about his life anymore. If Barrett used him as a catalyst to take over the pack, the peace between the human colonies and the mountain dwellers would vanish. Thousands of lives were at stake because he had wandered too far up the ridge in search of rare moss. "I am not a spy," Quentin said firmly. "I have my credentials in my pack. I have my research logs. If I can speak to your Alpha, I can prove why I am here." Nadine let out a short, sharp sound that might have been a laugh. "The Alpha does not read research logs, human. He reads strength and tradition. Barrett knows this. He has already convinced the younger ones that the humans are preparing an invasion. Your presence is the only evidence they need." Ramona turned to Quentin, her amber eyes wide with a mix of fear and fury. "You have to leave. Now. If I take you through the back tunnels, you might reach the tree line before the sun rises." "And what happens to you?" Quentin asked, his voice steady. "If I run, it proves Barrett's point. You become the traitor who let the spy escape. They will hunt you too. Ramona looked away, her jaw tightening. I have been an outcast my whole life, Quentin. I can survive the woods. You cannot. Quentin reached out and placed a hand on her arm. The silver fur was soft, but the muscle beneath was like iron. He didn't pull away when she looked back at him. I am not leaving you to face a coup alone, and I am not letting Barrett start a war using my name. We don't run. We change the game. Nadine looked between them, her expression softening slightly. You are a strange human. Most would be halfway down the mountain by now. I am a biologist, Quentin said, a small smile forming on his face. I study systems. And right now, your pack system is being manipulated by a single point of failure named Barrett. If we can disrupt his narrative, we can stop the hunt. How? Ramona asked, her curiosity overriding her protective instinct. There are 50 hunters between here and the Alpha's den. Quentin knelt by his pack and began pulling out pieces of equipment. He laid out a high-frequency distress beacon, a set of long-range thermal sensors, and a series of magnesium flares used for emergency signaling. He looked up at the two women. Barrett is relying on the darkness and the fear of the unknown, Quentin explained. He wants a hunt because he thinks he has the advantage in the shadows. We are going to turn this ridge into the brightest, loudest place on the planet. I have a beacon that emits a frequency that is harmless to humans but incredibly irritating to sensitive ears like yours. It won't hurt you, but it will make it impossible for them to coordinate or track us by sound. Nadine stepped forward, looking at the devices with genuine interest. You would use these against the pack. I would use them to get to the Alpha without a drop of blood being spilled, Quentin corrected. I want to stand in front of your leader and show him that I am not a threat. I want to show him that Ramona's choice to protect me was an act of wisdom, not betrayal. Ramona watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had spent years feeling like a freak because she preferred the company of books and human relics over the brutality of the hunt. Now, here was a human who saw her world not as a place of monsters, but as a system that could be understood and repaired. If we do this, there is no going back, Ramona said. If we fail, Barrett will kill us both before we can say a word. Then we don't fail, Quentin said. He handed a magnesium flare to Nadine. If you truly want to stop Barrett from destroying the peace, help us get past the sentries. You know the paths they won't be watching. Nadine took the flare, her fingers brushing against Quentin. She looked at Ramona and gave a single, sharp nod. The Alpha is old, but he is not a fool. If you can reach him, he will listen. But Barrett will be waiting at the gorge. It is the only way to the high den. Then that is where we will meet him, Ramona said, her voice regaining its fierce edge. She reached out and took Quentin's hand, her grip firm and warm. Thank you for staying, Quentin. I told you, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. We are friends. That changes the mathematics. They began to pack the gear, moving with a synchronized urgency. The quiet of the cave was gone, replaced by the electric tension of a plan in motion. Quentin felt a surge of adrenaline that surpassed anything he had experienced in the field. He wasn't just a scientist anymore. He was an ally. As they stepped out into the cold mountain air, the mist clinging to the rocks like a shroud, he knew the night was far from over. But for the first time since he had been cornered on the ridge, he wasn't afraid of the dark. He had a light, and he had a partner who was willing to defy her entire world to keep him standing. Together, they moved into the shadows of Lycanthropia, ready to face the storm that Barrett had summoned. The wind on the upper slopes of Lycanthropia did not just blow, it screamed through the narrow stone channels of the high den. Quentin wiped rain from his goggles, his fingers numb despite the thermal gloves. He checked the digital readout on his primary transmitter. The batteries were holding, but the cold was leaching their life faster than he liked. Beside him, Ramona moved with a predatory grace that the terrain could not hinder. Her silver fur was matted by the downpour, but her amber eyes burned with a steady, lethal focus. Nadine had been right about the timing. Below them, in a natural amphitheater formed by jagged obsidian pillars, the pack had gathered. There were dozens of them, their forms blurring between man and beast in the flickering light of resin torches. At the center stood Barrett. He was larger than the others, his chest scarred and his posture radiating a brutal confidence. He was speaking, his voice carrying over the wind, painting a picture of a human invasion that only he could stop. "They think we are weak," Barrett roared, his claws digging into the mud. "They think we are specimens to be studied. But tonight, we show them that lycanthropia belongs to the pack. We start with the spy and the traitor who protects him." Quentin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. He looked at Ramona. She was staring down at her former family, her jaw set. She reached back and squeezed his arm. Her grip was a silent promise. He felt the strength in her fingers, a physical reminder that he was no longer a solitary researcher lost in the wilderness. He was a part of something far more complex. "Are the emitters ready?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the gale. Quentin nodded, tapping the 3 small metallic cylinders clipped to his belt. "I need to place them in a triangle around the perimeter. The acoustics of this basin will amplify the frequency. It won't hurt them permanently, but it will feel like 1,000 needles in their inner ears. It should give us the window we need to reach the alpha. I have calibrated the wave to bypass the standard auditory range of humans, but for them, it will be a wall of sound." "Go," she said. "I will draw their attention. Do not let them see you until the signal is live." Quentin moved with a quiet efficiency he had learned during years of field research. He stayed low, using the shadows of the obsidian pillars to mask his movement. He clicked the first emitter into a crevice, the green light blinking once to signal it was armed. He moved to the second point, his boots slipping slightly on the slick rock. He caught himself, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wasn't a warrior, but he was a man who knew his tools. He placed the second device near the base of a leaning pine, securing it with a magnetic clamp. Across the clearing, Ramona stepped into the light of the torches. Her leather jacket was slick with rain, and she looked small against the backdrop of the gathered pack. But when she spoke, her voice cut through Barrett's rhetoric like a blade. "You speak of strength, Barrett, but you hide behind lies," she shouted. "The human is no spy. He is a guest under my protection. You want a war because you are too small to lead in peace. You fear his knowledge because you cannot control it." The pack fell silent. Barrett turned, a slow, cruel grin spreading across his face. "Ramona, I wondered if you would show up to watch your pet die, or did you come to beg for mercy? I see you still wear that ridiculous human skin. It suits a traitor." "I came to challenge the lie," she said, stepping closer. "I came to show the pack what a real leader looks like." Barrett laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "You challenge me, look at you. You dress like a scavenger and smell like a human. You are a freak, Ramona, and freaks don't make rules, they just die in the mud." He lunged. The movement was a blur of gray fur and muscle. Ramona met him head-on, her smaller frame rolling under his massive shoulders. She used his momentum against him, sending him sprawling into the mud. The pack erupted in snarls and howls, but they held back, waiting to see if their champion would rise. Quentin reached the final position. He set the third emitter and pulled the remote trigger from his pocket. He looked back at the center of the clearing. Barrett had recovered and was raining blows down on Ramona. She was fast, but the size difference was beginning to tell. Barrett caught her with a heavy swipe to the shoulder, sending her crashing against a rock. He raised his claws for a final, finishing strike. "Now," Quentin whispered. He pressed the trigger. A high-pitched resonance, invisible and silent to human ears, exploded through the high den. To the werewolves with their heightened senses, it was a physical blow. The pack members recoiled, clutching their heads and whimpering. Even Barrett stumbled, his roar of triumph turning into a confused yelp as his equilibrium shattered. He clutched at his ears, his predatory focus dissolved by the sonic assault. Quentin didn't waste a second. He stood up and threw a high-intensity flare into the center of the arena. The magnesium white light blinded the night-adjusted eyes of the pack. He scrambled down the slope, sliding through the mud and catching himself on a jutting root. He reached Ramona just as she was trying to stand. Her leather jacket was torn at the shoulder, and blood darkened her silver fur. "I have you," Quentin said, pulling her arm over his shoulder. "Lean on me." "You stayed," she gasped, her breath coming in ragged bursts. "I told you to run if it went wrong." "I told you the mathematics changed," he replied, his voice firm. "We are a team." Barrett was the first to recover. He was shaking his head, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a primal rage. He saw the human standing over Ramona and let out a sound that was pure hatred. He charged, ignoring the lingering whistle of the emitters. He was moving slower, but he was still a mountain of muscle. Quentin didn't panic. He reached for his climbing gear, unhooking a heavy magnetic winch and a spool of high-tension wire. As Barrett closed the distance, Quentin kicked a heavy supply crate he had dragged to the edge of the ridge earlier. The crate, filled with dense geological samples, plummeted down the steep incline on the opposite side of the ridge. The wire snapped taut. Quentin had anchored the other end to the obsidian pillar behind him. As the crate fell, the wire acted like a trip line, catching Barrett mid-stride and flipping him into the air. The massive werewolf crashed into the mud, the weight of the falling crate dragging the wire tight across his chest, pinning him against a fallen log with the force of several 100 pounds of stone. The pack watched in stunned silence. Their strongest warrior had been brought down not by teeth or claws, but by a man with a spool of wire and a box of rocks. The high-frequency noise faded as the emitters ran through their cycle, leaving only the sound of the rain and Barrett's frustrated snarls. Ramona stood up, leaning on Quentin for a moment before finding her own balance. She looked at the Alpha, an elder wolf who had been watching from the shadows of the high cave. Then she looked at the pack. "He is a human," she said, her voice steady and clear. "And he just did what none of you could. He stood his ground against a bully using his mind. If you want a leader who values blood over brains, follow Barrett into the mud. But if you want a future where we are more than just monsters in the dark, listen to the man who brought light to this den." Barrett thrashed against the wire, but the tension was too high. He looked up at Quentin, his eyes filled with a new kind of realization. This wasn't a weak animal to be hunted. This was an architect of his own defeat. Quentin kept his hand on the winch, his eyes locked on Barrett. "We didn't come here to kill you," he said. "We came to stop a mistake. Knowledge is not a threat unless you are afraid of the truth." Ramona stepped forward, the torchlight reflecting in the rain on her fur. She looked at Quentin, and for a brief moment the chaos of the night vanished. There was a warmth in her gaze that spoke of a bond deeper than any pack law. They had fought together, and for the first time in his life, Quentin felt like he belonged exactly where he was. The storm was still raging, but the power in the high den had shifted irrevocably. The Alpha stepped down from his ledge, his eyes moving from the pinned Barrett to the pair standing in the center of the clearing. The ritual hunt had been disrupted, but a new truth had been revealed in its place. Quentin felt Ramona's hand find his. It was small, cold, and covered in grit, but it felt like the most solid thing in the universe. Together, they stood in the rain, no longer outcasts but the architects of a new alliance. The Alpha moved with a heavy, deliberate grace that silenced the remaining murmurs of the pack. His fur was the color of slate, scarred by decades of challenges and the harsh winters of lycanthropia. He looked down at Barrett, who was still tangled in the high-tension wires Quentin had deployed. The aggressive challenger struggled, his claws scraping uselessly against the metal, but the more he thrashed, the tighter the coils gripped his muscular frame. "Release him," the Alpha commanded. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of Quentin's bones. Quentin stepped forward, his hands steady as he reached for the release mechanism on the snare's base. He didn't look at the other werewolves who were watching from the shadows of the amphitheater. He focused on the task, clicking the safety catch and allowing the tension to bleed out of the wires. The metal cables slithered back like silver snakes, leaving Barrett gasping on the muddy ground. Ramona did not back away. She stood over her defeated rival, her chest heaving, the rain washing the blood and grime from her silver fur. She looked at the Alpha, then back at Barrett, who was slowly pushing himself up to his knees. Barrett's eyes were full of a murderous hate, but he didn't lung. The presence of the Alpha and the cold efficiency of Quentin's technology had broken the momentum of his coup. "He is not a spy," Ramona said, her voice ringing out across the stone circle. "He is a scientist. He looks at the stars and the soil because he wants to understand them, not because he wants to conquer them. We have spent generations thinking that strength is the only thing that keeps us alive on this rock. We were wrong." The Alpha turned his gaze to Quentin. "You brought these devices into our sacred grounds. You disrupted a ritual that has stood since the first dens were dug." "I brought them to save a friend," Quentin replied, meeting the leader's yellow eyes. "And I brought them because Barrett was going to lead your people into a war you cannot win. My people are not your enemies, but we will defend ourselves. I would rather we share what we know than bleed for a piece of mountain that has enough room for everyone." A long silence followed, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the stone. The other pack members looked between their leader and the two outcasts standing in the center of the ring. Nadine stepped out from the periphery, her posture submissive but her expression firm as she stood near Ramona. "She speaks the truth," Alpha, Nadine said. "Barrett would have seen us slaughtered for his own pride." The Alpha looked at Barrett, who was now standing, though he leaned heavily on one side. The challenger's humiliation was complete. He had been outfought by an outcast and outsmarted by a human. In the law of the pack, there was no recovery from such a public failure. "Leave us," the Alpha said, directed at Barrett. "You are stripped of your rank. You will hunt the lowlands alone until the mountain forgets your name." Barrett snarled, a pathetic, wet sound, but he turned and disappeared into the darkness of the tree line without another word. The pack parted for him like a wound opening, then closed again once he was gone. The Alpha then turned back to Quentin and Ramona. "As for you," the Alpha continued, looking at Ramona, "you have claimed this human as your own. You have defended that claim with more than just teeth and claws. You have used the tools of his kind to best our strongest. That makes you something the pack does not understand." "I don't want them to understand me anymore," Ramona said. "I want to go where I don't have to hide who I am." The Alpha bowed his head slightly. "The ritual is ended. The human is free to go. And you, Ramona, are free of your debt to the pack. You are no longer bound by our laws or protected by our shadows." "I can live with that," she whispered. Quentin felt a surge of relief so strong it made his knees weak. He reached out and Ramona took his hand. Her grip was firm, her fur still damp, but the tension that had defined her since they met was starting to dissipate. They didn't wait for a further dismissal. Together, they turned and began the long trek down from the high den. The descent was easier than the climb. The storm began to break as they reached the lower ridges, the heavy clouds parting to reveal a sky filled with unfamiliar constellations. Quentin led the way, using his flashlight to pick out the safest paths through the jagged rocks. Ramona walked beside him, her leather jacket draped over her shoulders, her amber eyes reflecting the pale light of the stars. "Where will we go?" she asked after they had walked in silence for nearly an hour. "The colony isn't far from the base of this ridge," Quentin said. "It is a research station mostly. There are people there who would give anything to talk to someone like you, not as a specimen but as a person. I have a small cabin near the perimeter. It's full of books you haven't read yet." Ramona let out a short, dry laugh. "More books. I think I can handle that. But what about the others? Will they see me the way you do?" Quentin stopped and turned to face her. He reached up, brushing a stray lock of silver hair away from her eyes. "Some might be afraid at first," he admitted, "but they'll listen to me. And once they get to know you, they won't see a werewolf. They'll see the woman who stood up to a pack of monsters to save a guy who was just looking for moss." I was just protecting my property, she teased, though the warmth in her eyes betrayed her. Quentin smiled. You can't use that excuse anymore. You're not an outcast and I'm not a captive. We're just two people who didn't fit in, finding a place where we do. As they reached the final overlook above the valley, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The sun of Lycanthropia rose, casting a brilliant gold and orange glow across the sprawling forests and the distant, shimmering domes of the human settlement. It was a sight of incredible peace, a stark contrast to the violence and fear of the night before. Ramona stood at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the world she had only ever seen from the shadows. The light caught the silver in her fur, making her look like a creature of myth stepping into the reality of a new age. She looked at the human buildings, then at the man standing beside her. It's beautiful, she said softly. It's home, Quentin replied. He held out his hand again, and this time there was no hesitation. Ramona took it, her fingers interlocking with his. They began the final walk down the mountain, leaving the old laws and the ancient hunts behind them. They moved toward the valley not as representatives of two different species, but as two souls who had crossed the stars and the mountains to find the one thing that made the universe feel small enough to manage. The path ahead was clear, the air was fresh, and for the first time in either of their lives, the future wasn't something to be feared. It was a gift they had earned together. They walked into the morning light, side by side, ready to start a story that belonged only to them. The perimeter fence of the Aurelius Research Station shimmered in the early morning light. It was a grid of high-tensile wire and sensor nodes that marked the boundary between the wild, jagged ridges of Lycanthropia and the structured world of human science. Quentin felt the weight of his field pack shift as he stepped onto the paved access road, his hiking boots sounding loud against the asphalt. Beside him, Ramona moved with a cautious grace, her ears twitching at the mechanical whir of the automated turrets tracking their movement. She did not look like a prisoner, nor did she look like a conqueror. She looked like a woman walking into a new world with her eyes wide open. He saw the security team before they reached the primary gate. Two men in tactical vests emerged from the guardhouse, their rifles held at a low, ready position. They stopped 10 yards away, their eyes widening as they took in the sight of their lead biologist walking hand in hand, with a silver-furred lycanthropian wearing a scuffed leather jacket. "Wait right there, Doctor," the lead guard shouted. His name was Miller, a man Quentin had shared coffee with just a week ago. He looked terrified. "Quentin, get away from that thing. It is a predator." "She is my guest," Quentin said, his voice firm and carrying across the gravel. "And she is the reason I am standing here. Lower your weapons, Miller. That is an order from a senior staff member and a friend." The guards hesitated, their fingers twitching near the triggers. Ramona did not growl. She did not bare her teeth or adopt a hunting stance. She simply stood her ground, her fingers still laced through Quentin. She looked at the rifles not with fear, but with a cold, analytical detachment that seemed to unsettle the guards more than a roar would have. She was assessing the technology, the range, and the intent behind the barrels. Quentin led her forward, refusing to stop until they were at the gate. The scanners chirped, recognizing his biometric signature and the specialized clearance embedded in his wrist link. The heavy steel doors groaned as they slid open on massive hydraulic tracks. "It is loud," Ramona whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the colony's massive ventilation fans and the distant throb of the power generators. "It is the sound of people living together," Quentin told her, squeezing her hand. "It takes some getting used to. I promise the noise becomes a background after a while." They were met in the main courtyard by Director Holloway. She was a sharp-eyed woman who had spent 20 years managing difficult personalities and even more difficult planetary environments. She looked at Ramona, then at Quentin's repaired rain slicker, and finally at the way they stood together. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a deep, weary curiosity. "I received the emergency broadcast from the high den," Holloway said, her voice echoing off the metal walls of the surrounding labs. "You were supposed to be collecting moss samples for the pharmaceutical project, Quentin. Instead, you have brought back a diplomatic crisis that our charter isn't even equipped to handle." "Or I have brought back a diplomatic breakthrough," Quentin countered. "Barrett has been exiled. The pack has agreed to a truce because they saw that human ingenuity and lycanthropian strength are not mutually exclusive. Ramona is the reason the colony isn't under siege right now. She stood against her own kind to protect the peace." Holloway sighed, rubbing her temples as she looked at the silver-furred woman. "The legalities of this are going to be a nightmare for the corporate board. She is not a human citizen, but she is clearly a sentient being with agency and a leather jacket. Where do you propose she stays while we figure out the paperwork?" "With me," Quentin said immediately. There was no hesitation in his voice. He had spent the last 3 days trusting her with his life, and he wasn't about to relegate her to a holding cell or a guest barracks. Ramona looked at him, a flicker of surprise in her amber eyes. She had expected a cage or at least a separate den. The idea of shared space in this strange, metal world was a concept she was still processing. She looked at Holloway and spoke for the first time since entering the gates. "I am not a specimen to be filed away," the lycanthropian said, her voice steady and resonant. "I am an ally. If your people want to understand the mountains, you will need someone who knows how the wind speaks to the stone." Holloway nodded slowly, a small spark of respect appearing in her eyes. "Fair enough. Quentin, you are responsible for her. If a single pane of glass breaks or a security sensor goes off, it is on your head." In the hours that followed, the colony became a blur of activity. Scientists peered through reinforced windows, and technicians whispered as they passed in the corridors. Quentin ignored the stares. He led Ramona to his living quarters, a modest suite filled with books, digital displays, and a small kitchenette. It was a space designed for one person, but as soon as she stepped inside, it felt more complete. She walked to the window, looking back at the mountains they had just descended. The peaks were shrouded in heavy clouds now, the high den a distant memory hidden behind the mist. She touched the glass, flinching slightly at the cold, smooth surface that separated her from the open air. "Is this your den?" she asked, her tail twitching with a mix of anxiety and wonder. "It is," Quentin said. He began setting out a meal, simple things like fresh bread, sliced fruit, and cold water that he hoped she would find palatable. He moved with a quiet efficiency, wanting to show her that she was safe here. "It has no scent of the earth," she noted, turning back to him. "It smells of metal and filtered air. It is very clean, Quentin, almost too clean." "We can change that," he said. "We can bring in plants from the lower valley. We can open the windows when the wind is right and the storms are low. We can make it ours." He sat at the small table and gestured for her to join him. Ramona sat, her movements still possessing that predatory fluidity that made her seem out of place among the sharp corners of human furniture. She picked up a piece of fruit, turning it over in her claws before taking a bite. She seemed to savor the sweetness, a luxury rarely found on the high ridges. "What happens now?" she asked. "Barrett will not stay exiled forever. He will find followers among the younger males who crave the old ways of blood and hunt. He is a shadow that will grow." "Then we will be ready for the shadow," Quentin said. "But for now, the Alpha has given his word and the colony has a new protector. If anyone tries to treat you like a specimen or a threat, they will have to go through me. I am a biologist, Ramona. I know how to defend what is precious." Ramona reached across the table, her hand covering his. Her fur was soft, but the strength in her grip was a reminder of the power she possessed. She had left her kind for a man who saw the soul beneath the silver fur. "I do not need a protector, Quentin," she said with a small, knowing smile. "But I would very much like a partner." Quentin felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the colony's climate control. He looked at this woman, this creature of the high ridges who had challenged her own destiny for him. He realized that the research project he had been sent here to conduct was nothing compared to the life they were about to build. He wasn't just studying a world anymore. He was part of it. Later that evening, they stood on the small balcony of his quarters. The colony lights stretched out below them like a fallen constellation, a sea of gold and white against the dark soil of the valley. The air was crisp, carrying the heavy scent of pine from the lower slopes. "I used to watch these lights from the ridge," Ramona said, leaning her arms on the railing. "I thought they were stars that had fallen and gotten trapped by the humans. I thought your people were cruel for keeping the light in boxes." "And now?" Quentin asked, standing close enough to feel the heat radiating from her. "Now I see they are just lanterns," she said. "They are used to find the way home when the night gets too long." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Quentin wrapped an arm around her, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart. The intrigue of the pack and the politics of the research station felt miles away. In this moment, there was only the quiet reality of two souls who had found a common language in a universe that usually preferred silence. They had crossed the divide between species and culture, proving that understanding was not a matter of biology, but of choice. As the first true stars began to appear in the sky above Lycanthropia, Quentin knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There would be questions from the board, skeptics in the laboratories, and perhaps one day, a return of the hostility they had fled. But as he looked at Ramona, seeing the peace in her expression as she watched the horizon, he knew they would face it together. They were the bridge between two worlds, a living testament to the idea that the heart knows no borders. The mountain was behind them, and the future was a map they would draw together. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that she met with a soft, contented sound. They stayed there for a long time, watching the world turn, two outcasts who had finally found the one thing they had been searching for in the dark. They had found home in each other, and for the first time in his life, Quentin didn't need a compass to know exactly where he was supposed to be. The first few weeks at the Aurelius Research Station were a blur of negotiations and technical adjustments. Quentin found himself acting as a translator for concepts that had no words in either language. He spent his mornings in meetings with Director Holloway and his afternoons in the living quarters he shared with Ramona. While the station provided her with a private habitat, she preferred the open balcony of their shared space, where the wind carried the scent of the peaks and the distant forest. "Is the report finished, or are you just staring at the flickering lights again?" Ramona asked as she stepped into the main room. She looked different now, yet entirely the same. Her silver fur was brushed and healthy, and she still wore the leather jacket Quentin had repaired in the cave. Over it, she wore a tactical vest with the station insignia, a symbol of her role as the lead liaison. She had refused the standard uniform, claiming it was too restrictive for a scout. "I am double-checking the density maps," Quentin replied, smiling as she came to his side. "The Alpha is keeping the packs toward the northern ridges. They are honoring the new boundaries." Ramona leaned against the desk, her amber eyes reflecting the soft glow of the monitor. "He is a male of his word, Quentin. He saw what happened to Barrett. He knows that cooperation brings more food and safety than a conflict ever could. The pack is learning that there are better ways to prove strength than sharpening claws on human bones." The door behind them slid open, and Director Holloway stepped out. He looked less stressed than he had during their first encounter. The gray in his beard seemed less pronounced, and he carried a sealed tablet. "The board approved the expansion," Holloway said, his voice carrying a rare note of pride. "They are officially designating the valley as a shared ecological zone. No mining, no heavy construction, just the station and the sanctuary. We have been granted a permanent charter to continue the integration project." Ramona took the tablet, her claws clicking softly against the glass. "You mean we actually convinced the people in the tall buildings that we are worth more than the minerals under our feet?" Holloway nodded. Your reports on the pack hierarchies and the medicinal uses of the mountain moss did the trick. But mostly, it was the fact that you two haven't killed each other yet. It is hard to argue with results when the frontier is finally quiet. The director left them alone as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth from the forest below. "We did it," Quentin said softly. Ramona turned to him, her expression softening into a look of genuine peace. "We did. But this is just the beginning. There are still packs in the south that haven't heard the news. There are humans who will still reach for a rifle when they see a shadow in the trees. We have a lot of walking to do." "Then we keep working," Quentin said. He reached out and took her hand. Her grip was firm and warm, a constant reminder of the day she had stood between him and certain death. "We have time." Later that evening, they walked through the station's main commons. The researchers and security staff no longer stopped and stared. Some offered a nod of respect. Ramona had earned it by leading a search and rescue team 2 weeks prior when a scout had fallen into a ravine. She had tracked him through a blizzard, carrying him back to the gates before the cold could claim him. She had proven that her loyalty was not a matter of biology, but a matter of character. Nadine was waiting for them near the southern gate. She was wrapped in a heavy wool cloak provided by the station, looking more like a traveler than a warrior. She had been the primary messenger between the den and the valley, ensuring the truce held through the changing seasons. "The Alpha wants you to know that the winter dens are prepared," Nadine said, her voice low and steady. "He invites you to the feast of the first snow. Both of you. He says the human who uses wires and lights should come and see how we celebrate a hunt that doesn't involve blood." Quentin looked at Ramona, a questioning glance. "Is it safe for a clever shadow like me?" Nadine gave a sharp, toothy grin. "You are the one who took down Barrett with a wire and a box of noise, human. The younger ones tell stories about you now. They call you the clever shadow. You are safer in our camp than you are in this metal box. No one dares challenge the man who has a silver wolf at his side." "I will bring the supplies we promised," Quentin said. "The antibiotics and the thermal blankets. We will be there before the first flake falls." Nadine nodded and turned, disappearing into the tree line with a fluid grace that always left Quentin in awe. She moved like a part of the forest itself, a reminder that the world outside the station was still wild and untamed. As they walked back toward their quarters, Ramona stopped by a large window that looked out toward the mountain. "Do you ever miss the quiet of the cave?" she asked. "Sometimes," Quentin admitted, "but I like having a bed that doesn't smell like wet stone. And I like that I don't have to worry about a pack of hunters every time I go for a walk to collect samples." Ramona laughed, a rich sound that filled the corridor. "I miss the books. Your station library is too technical. I need more stories about the ancient world and the explorers who didn't have GPS units to tell them where to go." "I ordered a shipment from the next supply shuttle," Quentin said. "There is a collection of classic literature and some modern histories. They should be here in a month. I made sure to include that leather-bound edition of the poetry you liked." Ramona pulled him into a sudden, tight embrace. "You are a good man, Quentin. Most would have run the moment I stepped out of the shadows on that ridge." "I knew there was something different about you the moment you spoke," he whispered into her silver fur. "I didn't see a monster. I saw someone who was just as lonely as I was. I saw a partner." They reached their quarters, a space they had made their own. It was filled with a mix of high-tech equipment and mountain artifacts. A dried bouquet of the rare moss Quentin had been searching for sat in a glass jar on the table. It was a reminder of how their journey began, a simple search for knowledge that had turned into a fight for a future. The future of Lycanthropia was no longer a question of survival. It was a matter of growth. The alliance was fragile, built on the trust of two individuals who refused to be defined by the prejudices of their species. But as they sat together, watching the stars emerge through the reinforced glass, the weight of the world felt lighter than it ever had. "Are you happy, Ramona?" he asked. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes closing in contentment as she listened to the steady rhythm of his heart. "I am home," she said. "That is more than I ever hoped for when I was hiding in those caves." The lights of the station flickered low as the night cycle began. Outside, the mountain stood tall and silent, no longer a place of fear, but a vast territory of possibility. They had crossed the bridge together, and they were not planning on looking back. The story of the human biologist and the silver-furred outcast became a legend on Lycanthropia. It was a tale told in the research labs and around the pack fires, a reminder that the greatest discoveries are not found in the earth or the stars, but in the courage to trust another. As the dawn of a new era broke over the horizon, the path was clear. They were no longer two people from different worlds. They were the architects of a new one. The peace was theirs to keep, and the love they had found in the dark was the light that would guide them through every storm yet to come. They stood at the window together, watching the sun rise over a world that was finally at peace.